Here's another story about wise words from a young child. Young Danny was praying at his mother's knee. If I should die before I wake, if I should die? Go on, Danny, his mother said. You know the rest of the prayer. Wait a minute, interrupted the small boy. Scrambling to his feet, he hurried downstairs, and a short time later he was back. Dropping to his knees once again, he took up the petition where he left off. Finally, his mother questioned him about the episode and issued a loving rebuke. But Danny explained, Mom, I did think about what I was saying, but I had to stop and put all Teddy's wooden soldiers back on their feet. I knocked them down just to see how mad he'd be in the morning. And when I thought about it, if I should die before I wake, I wouldn't want him to find me like that. Lots of things seem like fun if you're going to keep living, but you don't want them that way if you should die before you wake. You're right, dear, said his mother with a quiver in her voice. She thought of herself and the many other grown-ups who should have stopped in the middle of their prayers to undo some wrong against another before proceeding. Danny in our story has shown wisdom beyond his years as he was praying. He took his words, if I die before I wake, seriously, and had to take a few moments to correct whatever damage he had inflicted on his brother and his brother's toys, so that he could pray earnestly in that simple nighttime prayer. If all of us took our words as seriously as Danny did, our prayers, the words we speak to God, and our conversations with other people might be different if we consider our words carefully. In our gospel reading this morning, Mark describes a conversation between Jesus and his disciples as they walked through the villages of Caesarea Philippi. Jesus asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" And they replied, "Oh, maybe John the Baptist, and Elijah, or one of the prophets." Jesus responds to this answer with an important question for his disciples. Who do you say I am? And Peter responds for the group, declaring, "You are the Messiah." Now Peter's words seem conclusive, and they affirm who he believes Jesus is and what Jesus' earthly mission is. But Jesus sternly orders them not to tell anyone about it. Perhaps he does not want the disciples to spread the word that he is the Messiah, because people might interpret those words incorrectly. He goes on to explain to the disciples that in order to complete his mission on earth, he must undergo great suffering and death. And that causes Peter to speak again, this time rebuking Jesus privately. Responding to Peter, Jesus turns to the disciples and rebukes him with the word Satan. Jesus' response to Peter's words probably stung the disciple. What he said before, "You are the Messiah," seemed so right to him. So why was Jesus dampening the moment with all this talk of suffering and death? Jesus wants his words to be clear to people, to Peter, and to the rest of the disciples, and to the world. He knows that suffering and death are in his future, and in the future of those who will commit to following him. And he's preparing them for the road ahead. He makes it clear by rebuking Peter that the suffering and death he faces will be their fate as his followers. Moving on to James's letter, we get another vision of how our words affect others. James is writing about the responsibility of those who would be teachers in the first century. The teacher held an important ministry because teachers influence others, especially in their understanding of faith. They had a serious responsibility to teach the truth. And in verse 6, James writes that the tongue brings the world of evil into our lives. Tongues seem like such destructive power that it affects the whole life from the cradle to the grave. He makes a point, reminding his readers that humans are created in God's image and likeness. And when we curse another person because they are in God's image and likeness, we are in effect cursing God. James has elevated words and the power of words to the ultimate level, implying that it is a life and death issue, a salvation issue. In our reading from the Old Testament, we hear the words of the woman Wisdom, who set a good example for preachers like myself and perhaps John Wesley, because it was their habit of preaching in the open air. Wisdom cries out in the streets. In the square, she raises her voice. At the busiest corner, she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates, she speaks. But she's not like all preachers or public speakers. Not all of us serve in those capacities. Yet we all have words, and when we speak, we need to choose them carefully. If we expect to shine the light of God's love on those to whom we are offering them. James makes a convincing argument that the words we use reflect our relationship with and belief in Jesus as the Lord of our lives. He's exposing the lie that says I can compartmentalize my life and give Jesus parts of it, but not all of it. James writes that the tongue is such a small thing, and yet this small thing could provide just direction for all of us. So the crux of all these texts lies with the question of when to speak and when to keep silent, while encouraging us to continue listening and learning. In Proverbs, wisdom calls to us. We ignore her at our peril. The author of James reminds us that those who teach are held to that higher standard, and that it's important to determine when to keep silent. It's as important to do that as to know when to speak. And in our gospel passage, Jesus is abandoned about speaking the truth of his death and resurrection, even as he exhorts the disciples to refrain from speaking his name to others, or registering their discomfort with the truth that his words present to them. And the psalmist encourages us to speak of God's glory and wisdom as eloquently as the heavens do in Psalm 19 this morning. So it's our turn. How do we measure our words? Do we think before we speak? And can we respond to our words as Danny did when he recognized how important it was that he had changed some things before he could pray even that simple prayer? Use words carefully. Make sure you use them to build and not to destroy. Amen.